Most people believe an argument is about proving who is right. They enter conversations like battles, collecting evidence, preparing responses, and waiting for the moment to destroy the other person's position. But the moment you become obsessed with winning, you have already allowed the other person to control your attention. Your mind becomes trapped inside their frame. You are no longer thinking about what matters to you. You are thinking about defeating them. This is why refusing unnecessary arguments can become one of the greatest forms of self-control. The desire to win every conversation can quietly become a weakness because it makes your peace dependent on other people's agreement. When someone challenges your opinion, criticizes your choices, or refuses to accept your explanation, the instinct may be to push harder. You gather more evidence, speak more forcefully, and search for the perfect sentence that will finally make the other person surrender. But what happens when they still refuse? You become frustrated, not because the subject itself is important, but because your ego has become invested in winning. At that point, the conversation is no longer about truth. It has become a contest for control. The person who understands this begins to see arguments differently. Not every disagreement is an opportunity to prove intelligence. Sometimes it is simply evidence that two people see the same situation from different perspectives. Your responsibility is not to force everyone to see the world exactly as you do. Your responsibility is to understand your own position clearly, communicate it when necessary, and recognize when continuing the discussion produces nothing valuable. This requires a level of emotional maturity because walking away can feel uncomfortable. The ego wants the final word. It wants recognition. It wants the other person to admit that you were right. Yet waiting for that admission gives another person unnecessary influence over your emotional state. Imagine spending hours arguing with someone who has no intention of changing their mind. Even if you eventually prove your point, what have you gained? Perhaps a temporary feeling of victory, but you may have lost hours of attention that could have been invested in something meaningful. You may have damaged a relationship, increased resentment, or created a conflict that continues long after the original subject has been forgotten. Winning the argument can therefore become more expensive than losing it. A wiser approach is to ask a different question. Does this conversation actually matter? Will changing this person's opinion improve my life, protect someone I care about, solve a real problem, or lead to a better decision? If the answer is no, there may be no reason to continue. This does not mean becoming passive or allowing others to mistreat you. There are moments when speaking clearly is necessary. Boundaries sometimes need to be communicated. False information may need correction. Important decisions require honest discussion. But there is a difference between communicating with purpose and arguing simply to satisfy pride. The first creates progress. The second often creates exhaustion. Learning this difference gives you greater control over your attention. You become selective about the battles you enter because you understand that your time cannot be recovered once it is spent. You also begin listening differently. Instead of waiting for an opportunity to defeat the other person's argument, you listen for what they actually mean. Sometimes you discover that the disagreement is based on different experiences rather than opposing intentions. Sometimes you discover useful information you had not considered. And sometimes you discover that the person is simply committed to conflict. In each situation, observation gives you more power than immediate reaction. There is also strength in allowing other people to believe what they choose. Someone can misunderstand you without changing who you are. Someone can disagree with your goals without making those goals less meaningful. Someone can criticize your choices without becoming the authority over your life. Your character does not require unanimous approval. The more secure you become within yourself, the less desperate you feel to convince everyone else. Eventually, you begin measuring conversations not by whether you won, but by whether they were worth your energy. That shift changes everything. You become calmer, more selective, and more focused. You speak when your words can create value, remain silent when silence protects your peace, and walk away when continuing would accomplish nothing. In doing so, you discover that real strength is not the ability to defeat everyone in conversation, but the discipline to recognize when there is nothing worth proving. Before you respond to anyone, learn to recognize what is happening inside you. A disagreement can trigger anger, embarrassment, fear, pride, or the sudden need to defend yourself. These emotions are powerful because they create the illusion that immediate action is necessary. Your heart may race, your thoughts may accelerate, and suddenly a simple disagreement feels like a threat to your identity. This is where emotional control becomes essential. The person who can pause before responding has created space between emotion and action, and inside that space is the ability to choose wisely. You do not need to eliminate anger or frustration. You need to prevent those emotions from making decisions for you. Anger can provide information. It may tell you that a boundary has been crossed or that something important matters to you, but anger does not automatically tell you what response will produce the best outcome. That decision requires thought. When you react immediately, you often speak from the most temporary version of yourself. You say things designed to hurt rather than things designed to solve the problem. You bring up old mistakes, exaggerate small issues, or make accusations that create new conflicts. Later, when the emotion disappears, you may wish you had responded differently. The damage, however, may already be done. A pause can prevent this. Sometimes the most intelligent response is to take a moment, breathe, and refuse to answer while your emotions are at their highest intensity. This does not make you weak. It demonstrates that you understand the difference between feeling something and acting upon it. Emotional control also means refusing to let another person's mood become your mood. If someone becomes aggressive, you do not have to become aggressive. If someone raises their voice, you do not have to raise yours. If someone attempts to provoke you, you do not have to accept the invitation. Their behavior belongs to them. Your response belongs to you. Maintaining this separation protects your independence. It prevents other people from controlling your emotional state simply by behaving badly. The ability to remain calm also improves your perception. When you are emotionally overwhelmed, your mind searches for evidence that supports your current feelings. If you are angry, every word may sound disrespectful. If you are afraid, neutral behavior may appear threatening. If you feel rejected, ordinary distance may seem like intentional cruelty. Calmness allows you to see more possibilities. Perhaps the person is having a difficult day. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding. Perhaps the disagreement is real, but not as important as it initially appeared. You cannot know until you create enough distance to think clearly. Emotional discipline becomes especially important when dealing with people who intentionally seek reactions. Some individuals gain satisfaction from seeing others lose control. They provoke because they know emotional reactions can be used against the person who gives them. The moment you understand this pattern, you become less predictable. You stop giving immediate emotional rewards to provocation. You observe, consider, and choose your response based on what actually serves your interests. This does not mean tolerating harmful behavior. You can remain calm while establishing firm boundaries. You can leave a situation without creating unnecessary drama. You can speak directly without becoming cruel. You can disagree without becoming consumed by hostility. These are signs of control, not weakness. Over time, emotional discipline becomes a form of freedom. You no longer spend hours regretting words spoken in anger. You stop allowing small provocations to ruin entire days. You make decisions with greater clarity because temporary emotions no longer dominate your thinking. People may still attempt to provoke you, disappoint you, or misunderstand you, but their actions no longer automatically determine your response. You have developed the ability to pause, observe, and choose. That ability is one of the most valuable forms of self-mastery because it allows you to remain the author of your behavior, even when circumstances are designed to push you toward reaction. Listening carefully is one of the most underrated forms of strength because it gives you access to information that constant talking often hides. Many people enter conversations with a simple goal: to make themselves understood. They prepare responses while the other person is speaking, search for opportunities to interrupt, and focus on defending their own position. Because of this, they hear words without truly understanding the person behind them. A disciplined listener behaves differently. They pay attention not only to what is said, but also to what is avoided, repeated, emphasized, or expressed through emotion. They allow the other person enough space to reveal their perspective without immediately trying to control the conversation. This patience creates a significant advantage because understanding comes before judgment. When you listen without rushing to respond, you often discover information that would have remained hidden if you had immediately turned the conversation into a debate. People reveal their priorities through the subjects they repeatedly discuss. They reveal their insecurities through the things they become defensive about. They reveal their values through the choices they describe and the people they admire or criticize. They reveal their intentions through patterns of behavior. None of this requires manipulation. It simply requires attention. Listening also helps you recognize the difference between what someone says and what their actions demonstrate. Words can be carefully selected, but consistent behavior is much harder to disguise. Someone may say they respect your time while repeatedly ignoring your boundaries. Another person may claim loyalty while disappearing whenever you need support. A person may speak confidently about responsibility while constantly blaming others for their mistakes. If you focus only on their words, you may accept the story they are presenting. If you observe their behavior over time, you gain a more accurate understanding. This is why listening should be combined with observation. Another powerful benefit of revealing less is that you protect your own thoughts from unnecessary exposure. Not every person needs access to your plans, fears, ambitions, or private concerns. When you feel pressure to explain yourself constantly, you may reveal information that later becomes misunderstood or used against you. You do not need to hide yourself from everyone, but you should be intentional about what you share and with whom. Trust should develop gradually through consistent behavior rather than being granted automatically. Speaking less can also improve the quality of what you say. When you stop filling every silence, your words become more deliberate. Instead of talking simply to maintain attention, you begin speaking when you have something meaningful to contribute. People often listen more carefully to someone who does not constantly compete for the spotlight. Your calmness creates space for thought, and your statements carry greater weight because they are not buried beneath unnecessary explanation. There is also a psychological benefit to listening. It reduces the need to defend your ego. When you genuinely listen, you do not have to treat every disagreement as a personal threat. You can hear another perspective without immediately accepting it. You can ask questions without surrendering your position. You can acknowledge useful information without feeling defeated. This flexibility makes you more intelligent because learning becomes more important than appearing right. Over time, the habit of listening transforms your relationships and decisions. You understand people more accurately, recognize patterns more quickly, and avoid many conflicts that begin with assumptions. You also become more comfortable with silence because you no longer fear moments when you are not speaking. Instead of trying to dominate every conversation, you allow information to come toward you. You listen, observe, think, and then decide whether a response is necessary. This approach creates a quiet form of confidence because you no longer need to prove your intelligence through constant speech. You understand that sometimes the person who says the least is learning the most, and the person who patiently observes may understand the situation far better than the person desperately trying to control the conversation. There are moments in life when silence communicates more than an explanation ever could. Many people believe they must respond to every accusation, correct every misunderstanding, and defend themselves against every negative opinion. They fear that remaining silent will make them appear weak, guilty, or uncertain. Yet constantly explaining yourself can create the opposite impression. It can make you appear dependent on other people's approval because you are always trying to convince them of your value or innocence. Learning when to remain silent is not about surrendering your voice. It is about understanding that your attention and words have value, and they should not be given automatically to every person or situation. Silence becomes especially powerful when someone is attempting to provoke you. Some people create conflict because they want an emotional reaction. They know that anger makes people speak carelessly, reveal information, and make decisions they would not normally make. If you respond immediately, you may give them exactly what they wanted. If you remain calm, observe the situation, and refuse to participate in unnecessary drama, you protect yourself from being pulled into their emotional environment. This does not mean accepting disrespect or avoiding necessary confrontation. It means choosing the right moment and method for addressing a problem instead of allowing another person's behavior to dictate your reaction. Silence also gives you time to understand what is actually happening. When emotions are high, people often assume they know the other person's intentions. They interpret every word negatively and begin constructing stories about what must have been meant. A pause creates room for facts to appear. Perhaps the situation was misunderstood. Perhaps the other person was reacting to information you did not know. Perhaps the disagreement is real but temporary. Without patience, you may create a larger problem from an incomplete understanding. Silence allows you to gather information before making a decision. Another reason silence can be valuable is that not every accusation deserves an answer. People will sometimes criticize you based on incomplete information, personal insecurity, jealousy, or simple misunderstanding. If you attempt to correct every false opinion, you will spend your life chasing other people's perceptions. This is impossible because opinions constantly change. One person may praise you while another criticizes you on the same day. If your confidence depends on controlling these perceptions, you will never experience peace. Instead, focus on what you can control: your behavior, your standards, your work, and your character. Consistent actions eventually communicate more clearly than endless explanations. Silence can also strengthen your ability to observe. When you stop rushing to fill every quiet moment, you notice more. You see who continues the conflict when you refuse to participate. You notice who respects your boundaries and who becomes angry because they cannot control your attention. You observe which relationships become healthier through honest communication and which relationships depend entirely on drama. These observations help you make better decisions about the people and situations you allow into your life. There is a difference between silent confidence and silent resentment. Healthy silence is intentional. It does not involve secretly collecting anger while pretending everything is fine. If a serious issue needs to be addressed, address it calmly and directly. If a boundary has been crossed, communicate the boundary. If a relationship is harmful, create appropriate distance. Silence should protect your peace, not prevent you from handling important responsibilities. The goal is not to become someone who never speaks. The goal is to become someone who speaks with purpose. When you develop this discipline, your words become more meaningful because they are no longer reactions to every passing emotion. You begin choosing conversations based on their importance rather than their ability to provoke you. Sometimes you speak firmly, sometimes you ask a question, sometimes you walk away, and sometimes you simply remain silent because you understand that no explanation is necessary. In those moments, Silence becomes more than the absence of words. It becomes a deliberate choice to protect your attention, preserve your dignity, and refuse to give unnecessary conflict more power than it deserves. Disagreement becomes exhausting when you begin treating every difference of opinion as a personal attack. Someone can reject your idea without rejecting you. Someone can question your decision without questioning your worth. Someone can choose a different path without declaring that your path is wrong. Yet many people struggle to separate their identity from their opinions. When an idea they believe in is challenged, they feel personally threatened, and suddenly a simple conversation becomes a battle for self-respect. This happens because the ego wants certainty. It wants to believe that being right means being unvaluable and being wrong means being weak. Once you understand this pattern, you can begin separating your identity from your opinions. Your beliefs are things you hold. They are not the entirety of who you are. They can be examined, improved, and sometimes changed without diminishing your worth. This creates a healthier relationship with disagreement. Instead of immediately becoming defensive, you can become curious. Ask why the other person sees the situation differently. What experiences shape their perspective? What information might they possess that you do not? What part of their argument deserves consideration? These questions do not require you to surrender your position. They simply allow you to think more clearly. Intellectual strength is not demonstrated by refusing to change your mind. It is demonstrated by being capable of changing your mind when better evidence appears. Taking disagreement personally also creates unnecessary emotional exhaustion. If every criticism becomes a threat, you will constantly feel surrounded by enemies. A coworker's suggestion feels like an insult. A friend's disagreement feels like betrayal. A stranger's opinion online feels like something you must immediately correct. Your mind becomes trapped in defensive mode. Instead of investing energy in your goals, you spend it protecting an image of yourself. This is a poor trade. Your attention is limited, and it should be directed toward things that genuinely improve your life. Not every opinion deserves access to your emotional world. There will always be people who misunderstand you. Some will criticize you because they genuinely see a weakness. Others will criticize because your choices challenge their expectations. Some criticism may be useful, while some may be completely irrelevant. Your task is not to accept everything or reject everything. Your task is to evaluate, take useful information, learn from it, and discard what has no value. This ability gives you emotional flexibility because you can receive feedback without allowing it to control your identity. Strong boundaries also become easier when you stop taking everything personally. You can say, I understand your perspective, but I disagree, without turning the disagreement into hostility. You can recognize someone's feelings without accepting responsibility for emotions they created themselves. You can leave conversations that become disrespectful without needing to prove who was right. This does not mean avoiding accountability. If you have made a genuine mistake, acknowledge it. If your behavior has hurt someone, take responsibility. Emotional maturity means being able to distinguish between constructive criticism and unnecessary personal attacks. Another powerful shift happens when you stop needing everyone to understand your decisions. Your goals may not make sense to people who have different priorities. Your boundaries may disappoint people who benefited from your lack of boundaries. Your growth may make certain relationships uncomfortable. None of these reactions automatically mean you are doing something wrong. Sometimes becoming more authentic means accepting that not everyone will approve of the changes you make. The more secure you become in your values, the less pressure you feel to convince everyone else. You begin listening without surrendering, disagreeing without attacking, and walking away without resentment. This creates emotional freedom because your self-worth no longer rises and falls according to the opinions of other people. You understand that disagreement is simply part of human life. You do not need to eliminate it. You need to stop allowing it to control you. When you can hear opposing opinions, evaluate criticism calmly, accept responsibility when necessary, and continue moving forward without bitterness, you become much harder to manipulate through conflict. Your peace remains yours because you no longer treat every disagreement as a battle over your identity. There comes a point when you realize that your peace is more valuable than winning an argument. This realization changes the way you communicate, the way you choose relationships, and the way you spend your attention. You begin understanding that every conflict carries a cost. Some disagreements require patience and honest discussion because important boundaries, responsibilities, or relationships are involved. Others exist only because two people are unwilling to let go of their need to be right. Learning to recognize the difference is a form of wisdom. You do not become peaceful by avoiding every difficult conversation. You become peaceful by refusing to give unnecessary conflict more importance than it deserves. Protecting your peace begins with understanding that your attention is limited. Every argument consumes mental energy. Even after the conversation ends, you may replay the words in your mind, imagine better responses, or wonder what the other person thinks about you. This mental repetition can become more exhausting than the original disagreement. If you allow every conflict to follow you throughout the day, your mind never receives enough quiet to focus on meaningful priorities. You may physically leave the argument while emotionally remaining inside it. The disciplined person learns how to close the door mentally as well as physically. Once the conversation is finished, they return their attention to the present. This does not mean pretending the problem never happened. It means refusing to continue feeding it with unnecessary thought. Protecting your peace also requires choosing your battles carefully. There are moments when silence is wise and moments when silence would allow a serious problem to continue. If someone repeatedly violates an important boundary, a clear response may be necessary. If someone depends on you for an important responsibility, communication cannot simply be avoided. Wisdom lies in knowing the difference between conflict that creates resolution and conflict that exists only to create emotional exhaustion. Before entering an argument, ask yourself what outcome you actually want. If the answer is simply to make the other person feel defeated, you may be serving your ego rather than your purpose. If the goal is understanding, resolution, safety, or a clear boundary, then communication may be worthwhile. Actions often speak more powerfully than arguments. When someone doubts your ability, you do not always need to defend yourself verbally. Improve your skills. When someone questions your discipline, continue showing up. When someone misunderstands your character, remain consistent. Time gives actions an opportunity to speak. Words can be dismissed, misunderstood, or forgotten, but repeated behavior creates evidence. This does not mean you should live to prove people wrong. That would still allow their opinions to control your direction. Build yourself because your future matters, not because someone else doubted you. There's freedom in no longer needing the final word. The final word often satisfies pride for a few seconds, but provides little lasting value. Sometimes the strongest decision is simply to say what needs to be said and then stop. You do not need to continue explaining after your position is clear. You do not need to chase someone who refuses to understand. You do not need to convince everyone that you are a good person. Your behavior over time will communicate far more than a single argument ever could. As you develop this discipline, people may notice that you have become calmer, you respond instead of reacting, you listen instead of interrupting, you choose your words carefully, you leave unnecessary conflicts without feeling defeated. Your peace becomes less dependent on external circumstances because you have learned to govern your own attention. This is where real self-mastery begins. You are no longer trying to control every conversation or every person's opinion. You are controlling what deserves your energy. You speak when your words matter. Remain silent when silence protects your focus. Establish boundaries when necessary, and continue building your life regardless of who agrees with you. Your actions become your strongest statement, and your peace becomes something you protect deliberately rather than something you surrender whenever another person demands a reaction.